It's strange, isn't it? How someone can be in your life for so long, so seamlessly that they feel like a fixture, like the worn armchair in the corner of the room or the comforting hum of a refrigerator. Lucas was like that for me, part of the background, until he wasn't. The living room scene keeps replaying in my mind, as if it were a critical moment in some coming-of-age drama. Lucas, kneeling on the floor, effortlessly holding the wooden shelf in place with one hand while the other tightened screws with a screwdriver. His hair was tousled in that careless, I don't try, but I still look good way, a few strands falling over his forehead. And the muscles in his arms, seriously, where had they been all this time? Or had I just not been looking? I couldn't stop staring. My heart thudded in a way that made me feel ridiculous, like some schoolgirl with a crush, which, let's face it, I probably was. But then he glanced up, catching me watching him, and smiled. "You okay there, daydreamer?" He teased, his voice warm and teasing, in a way that made my stomach do somersaults. "Yeah," I said quickly, feeling my cheeks flush. "Just admiring your handiwork." He chuckled, the kind of laugh that felt like sunshine breaking through a cloudy day. "Well, I'll take that as a compliment." He stood, dusting off his jeans, and for a moment, we were standing just a little too close. I could smell the faint scent of sawdust on his shirt, mixed with something undeniably him. I stepped back, feigning interest in my phone, and he went back to work as if nothing had happened. But for me, everything had happened. That night, I lay in bed, cocooned under my blanket, staring at the faint patterns the moonlight cast on the ceiling. My mind wouldn't quiet. Every memory of Lucas, every shared laugh, every casual touch, every little thing he'd ever said, came flooding back in an unrelenting tide. There was the time we'd raced each other down the street on bikes, him letting me win just so he could laugh at how smug I looked. Or the night we'd sat under the stars on the roof, talking about everything and nothing, the silence between us feeling as easy as breathing. And the time I'd sprained my ankle in gym class, and he carried me all the way home, despite me insisting I could hobble on my own. For years, I thought of him as a brother, a protector, a friend, someone I could always count on. But now, lying here with my heart doing that fluttery, stupid thing, I realized I'd been blind. Lucas wasn't just the boy who shared our family dinners and teased me mercilessly about my terrible taste in music. He was Lucas. Kind, steady, ridiculously good-looking Lucas. And somewhere along the way, without me noticing, he'd slipped past the walls I didn't even know I'd built around my heart. The realization felt equal parts thrilling and terrifying. Thrilling because I couldn't deny the rush that came with the thought of him. Terrifying because, what now? What if I just ruined everything by seeing him in this new light? What if I couldn't unsee it? The thought kept me awake well into the early hours, my mind spinning scenarios that ranged from the romantic to the disastrous. Maybe he felt the same way, and all this time, he'd been waiting for me to notice. Or maybe he still thought of me as the annoying little sister he'd been forced to live with. The uncertainty gnawed at me, and I hated it. By the time morning came, I felt like a zombie. But it wasn't just the lack of sleep. It was the realization that I couldn't just pretend everything was normal anymore. Not when I could barely look at him without blushing. Not when my pulse quickened every time he said my name. At breakfast, he was his usual self, sitting at the table with a bowl of cereal and his phone in hand. He was scrolling through something, his face relaxed, unaware of the emotional turmoil wreaking havoc inside me. I sat across from him, nibbling on a piece of toast and trying not to stare. "Late night?" he asked, not looking up. I nearly choked on my coffee. "What?" "You've got that tired look," he said, finally glancing up. "Bad dreams or something?" If only he knew. Something like that, I mumbled, avoiding his gaze. He shrugged and went back to his phone, oblivious. And in that moment, I realized something else, something equally terrifying and exhilarating. I wasn't just crushing on Lucas. I was falling for him, hard. The morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen windows, painting golden streaks across the table as I sat nursing my coffee, trying to look composed. My mind, however, was a whirlwind. Lucas had just casually asked me to help with his presentation project, as though my world wasn't already tilted on its axis. Of course I said yes, though I might have agreed to just about anything at that point. But now I was trying not to panic as I carried my laptop to the living room where he was setting up. He looked relaxed, leaning back on the couch with a notebook in hand, his brow furrowed in that endearing way he always did when he was focused. His shirt was slightly rumpled, like he'd just rolled out of bed, but somehow it only made him look better. Unfair, honestly. "Thanks for doing this," he said, flashing me that easy smile as I sat down. "I've been drowning in this stuff, and I know you're good at organizing chaos." I laughed nervously, trying to play it cool. "Well, organizing chaos is my specialty," I said, though my voice came out a little shaky. Smooth. Really smooth. We dove into the project, or at least he did. Lucas explained the details of his presentation, his voice steady and confident, while I nodded along, trying desperately to focus. But then he leaned closer to show me something on my screen, and that's when I caught it. The cedarwood scent mingled with the faint freshness of laundry. It hit me like a wave, and I swear my brain immediately decided to shut down. I typed aimlessly, the words on the screen blurring together. How was I supposed to concentrate when he was right there, his shoulder brushing mine every now and then, his voice low and soothing? My hands trembled slightly on the keyboard, and I hoped he didn't notice. "You okay?" he asked suddenly, glancing at me. "Huh?" I blinked, feeling caught. Yeah, totally fine." "Why?" He smiled, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "You're typing the same line over and over." I looked down at the screen and groaned inwardly. He was right. I quickly backspaced the repetitive mess, muttering something about being distracted by formatting issues. He chuckled, and the sound sent a ripple of warmth through me. At one point, as I was scrolling through a spreadsheet, my hand brushed his as he reached for the mouse. It was the lightest, most accidental touch, but it felt like a jolt of electricity had coursed through me. I froze, half expecting him to pull back or laugh it off. But he didn't. He didn't move at all, and for a split second, I wondered if he'd felt it too. My heart hammered in my chest as I risked a glance at him. His expression was unreadable, his eyes fixed on the screen like he was concentrating too hard. But there was something in his posture, something just a little more rigid than usual. Or maybe I was imagining it. I couldn't be sure anymore. When he finally moved his hand, I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. The air between us felt charged, like static clinging to fabric on a dry day. Every little movement, every accidental brush of his arm against mine, felt magnified 100 times. By the time we finished, I felt drained and exhilarated all at once. Lucas leaned back with a satisfied sigh, running a hand through his hair. "I think we actually made sense of that mess," he said, glancing at me. "Couldn't have done it without you." I tried to downplay it, waving a hand dismissively. "You would have figured it out eventually." He shook his head, his gaze lingering on me a moment longer than necessary. "No, really, you were amazing." The compliment caught me off guard, and I felt a blush creeping up my neck. "Well, I'm glad I could help," I said, standing up and gathering my laptop as quickly as possible. I needed to escape before I embarrassed myself further. But as I turned to leave, he called out, "Hey, don't run off just yet." I was thinking we could grab lunch later. My treat. I stopped in my tracks, my heart skipping a beat. Was this just Lucas being Lucas, friendly and thoughtful, or was there something more? The buzzing in the air between us made me think maybe, just maybe, it was the latter. "Sure," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the excitement bubbling inside me. "Sounds good." As I walked back to my room, laptop clutched to my chest, I couldn't stop smiling. Something had shifted. I didn't know exactly what it was, but I could feel it, like the first crack of sunlight breaking through after a storm. And for the first time, I wondered if Lucas felt it too. The next morning started like any other, but everything about it felt off. Lucas was unusually quiet at breakfast, his typical chatter replaced by short, clipped answers. I couldn't even bring myself to meet his eyes. Every time I tried, a blush crept up my neck like a wildfire. Was he acting strange because of yesterday? Or was it just me, overanalyzing every little thing? The silence stretched through the day like an invisible wall between us. I kept myself busy with chores, trying not to think about him, but it was impossible. Every time I walked past him, my heart thudded loudly in my chest, like it was betraying me. I wondered if he could hear it. Did he feel the same tension I did, or was I just imagining it? By evening, the atmosphere in the house was stifling. I needed a break from him, from my own spiraling thoughts, from everything. So I decided to take a long shower. Maybe the hot water would wash away the frustration and confusion that had been clinging to me all day. I grabbed my towel and headed to the bathroom. Without thinking too much, I left the door slightly ajar. Not wide open, just enough to let some cooler air in. It wasn't intentional, or at least, that's what I told myself. But deep down, there was a part of me, small and reckless, that wondered what might happen if Lucas noticed. The warm water cascaded over me, and I let out a long sigh, trying to let the tension melt away. My thoughts wandered to him again, unbidden but unstoppable. His smile, his laugh, the way his hand had brushed mine yesterday. My stomach twisted in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. And then I heard it, the soft creak of the bathroom door. My entire body froze. At first, I thought it might be my imagination, but then I heard it again, the sound unmistakable. My heart raced, pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. "Amelia," his voice came, low and soft, like he was testing the waters. My breath caught. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't even move. The air was thick with anticipation, each second dragging on like an eternity. And then, before I could gather my thoughts, the curtain shifted. Slowly, it pulled back, and there he was, standing on the other side. His hair was slightly disheveled, his expression unreadable, but his eyes, they were locked on mine, intense and searching. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. The steam swirled around us, blurring the edges of the moment, making it feel dreamlike, almost unreal. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was him, or maybe it was me, but the space between us disappeared in an instant. His lips brushed against mine, hesitant at first, like he was giving me the chance to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I leaned into him, my hands finding their way to his chest as the kiss deepened. It was slow and soft, a tender exploration that sent shivers down my spine despite the heat of the shower. His hands rested gently on my waist, not pushing, not demanding, just holding me like I was something fragile and precious. The warmth of his touch seeped into my skin, and for a moment, it felt like nothing else in the world existed but him. I could feel the warmth of his body with every part of mine. He pressed me tightly to him. It was very hot. At that moment, all my thoughts were about him. His hands awkwardly and very gently explored me. It was wonderful. When we finally pulled apart, his forehead rested against mine, his breath mingling with mine in the humid air. His eyes searched my face, and I could see the question there, unspoken but clear. "Lucas," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. I didn't even know what I was going to say. My mind was a whirlwind of emotions, confusion, excitement, fear, but above all, there was this undeniable certainty that I didn't want him to leave. He smiled, the kind of smile that made my knees weak, and brushed a strand of wet hair from my face. "Amelia," he said softly, his voice full of something that felt like a promise. "I didn't mean for this to happen, but I don't regret it." His words hung in the air, heavy and electric. I didn't know what this meant, what it would change, but in that moment, I didn't care. All I knew was that for the first time in a long time, everything felt right. The next morning, the kitchen smelled of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon, the familiar scent of a family breakfast. Mom was bustling around, serving pancakes while Dad read the newspaper, his usual spot at the head of the table. Lucas was already seated, looking as composed as ever, sipping his coffee like nothing had happened the night before. I, on the other hand, felt like a live wire, every nerve tingling with the memory of his lips on mine. I slid into my chair, trying to act normal, but the moment our eyes met, my resolve nearly crumbled. His expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker in his gaze, something that made my pulse race. I bit back a smile and focused on pouring myself a glass of orange juice, my hands trembling just enough to make me glad no one else was paying attention. But then a wicked thought crossed my mind. The table was long, with Lucas sitting directly across from me. Slowly, I extended my foot under the table, grazing his leg lightly with my toes. I felt him stiffen, and when I dared to glance up, his eyes widened in shock before narrowing slightly, his lips pressing into a firm line. He shot me a look, the kind that said, "Really? Here? Now?" But I just smirked, taking a sip of my juice like I was the picture of innocence. Across the table, Mom and Dad were chatting about weekend plans, completely oblivious to the tension crackling between Lucas and me. After breakfast, I headed back to my room, the teasing grin still lingering on my face. I was barely inside when the door creaked open behind me. Before I could turn, Lucas slipped in, shutting the door quietly but firmly. "What was that?" he whispered, his voice a mix of amusement and exasperation. I shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "What was what?" "You know exactly what," he said, stepping closer. His tone was scolding, but the smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth betrayed him. "You're going to get us caught." "Only if you can't keep your cool," I shot back, my heart pounding as he closed the distance between us. "Amelia," he warned, but there was no real conviction in his voice. I didn't give him a chance to say anything else. I reached up, pulling him down into a kiss. His hands found my waist, gripping tightly as he kissed me back, all hesitation forgotten. My fingers tangled in his hair, and for a moment, the world outside my room ceased to exist. It was just us, tangled in a whirlwind of stolen moments and forbidden touches. I slowly sank to my knees, wanting only one thing, him. He held my hair and helped me. And then came the knock. We broke apart so fast it was almost comical, our breathing ragged as we stared at each other wide-eyed. "Amelia." Mom's voice came from the other side of the door. My heart was racing, and not in the good way this time. Yeah," I called out, trying to sound normal as I smoothed my hair. Lucas was already halfway across the room, his back pressed against the wall like he was trying to disappear. "Do you want to go grocery shopping with me?" "I'm leaving in 10 minutes," Mom asked. I cleared my throat, glancing at Lucas, who was shaking his head furiously, mouthing "say no." "I think I'll stay home," I replied, hoping my voice didn't betray how flustered I was. "Thanks, though." "All right," Mom said, and I heard her footsteps retreating down the hall. We both let out a breath of relief, laughing quietly at the absurdity of the situation. "That was close," I said, my voice still shaky from adrenaline. Lucas crossed the room in 2 strides, his lips quirking into that irresistible grin. "Too close," he agreed, but he didn't seem all that concerned. "Your trouble, you know that." "Maybe," I said, grinning back. "But you don't seem to mind." "Not even a little," he admitted, leaning in for another kiss. This one slower, softer, like we had all the time in the world. And maybe we did, at least for now. The next day started like any other. The sun filtered through my bedroom blinds, painting golden stripes across my bedspread as I shuffled out of bed, still caught in a haze of dreams that lingered from the night before. The house was quiet, the hum of the morning just beginning to build. I made my way to the bathroom, toothbrush in hand, ready to start the day and maybe, just maybe, see him again. I was mid-brush, staring absently at my reflection in the mirror, when I heard the door click shut behind me. I froze, the toothbrush hanging out of my mouth, as I turned to see Lucas standing there, his back against the door. He didn't say a word, just reached behind him to lock it. The soft snick of the lock echoed in the small space, making my pulse race. "Lucas," I started, my voice muffled by toothpaste foam, but he crossed the room in 2 long strides before I could say anything else. His arms slid around me, pulling me close, and I caught a faint whiff of his cologne, cedar wood and something warm, something that smelled like him. My toothbrush clattered into the sink as I gripped the counter behind me, my heart hammering in my chest. "Amelia," he said, his voice low and rough, like he'd been holding back something that finally broke loose. "I can't stop thinking about you, about us." My brain scrambled to process what was happening, but my body already knew the answer. I leaned into him, my fingers clutching at his shirt as he cupped my face, his thumb brushing lightly over my cheek. His eyes searched mine, as if waiting for permission, and I gave it in the only way I could, by closing the space between us. The kiss was electric, a jolt of something raw and undeniable coursing through me. It wasn't soft or tentative like the night before. This was urgent, almost desperate, like he needed this as much as I did. My back hit the counter as he pressed closer, his hands tangling in my hair. I felt his hardness. He started a little inexperienced. Over time, his movements became more confident. The sound of running water and the faint creak of the house settled around us, but nothing else mattered. Time didn't exist in that moment. It was just him, just me, just us. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were breathing hard, our foreheads resting against each other. His hands stayed on my waist, steadying me even as my legs felt like jelly. I opened my eyes to find him staring at me, his expression soft but intense, like he was memorizing every detail of my face. "What are we doing, Lucas?" I whispered, though I wasn't sure I wanted an answer. He smiled then, that crooked, boyish grin that had always made my heart skip a beat. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know I don't want to stop." And that was all I needed to hear. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Every time I caught his eye, every time our hands brushed, or he found some excuse to touch my shoulder, or brush a stray hair from my face, it felt like a secret only the 2 of us shared. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. By the time evening rolled around, I couldn't stop replaying the bathroom scene in my head. The way he'd looked at me, like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. The way his touch felt, both grounding and electrifying. It was addictive, and I was already craving more. Later that night, I found myself sitting on the porch steps, the cool night air wrapping around me as I stared out at the stars. The door creaked open behind me, and I didn't have to look to know it was him. Lucas sat down beside me, his shoulder brushing mine. For a moment, we just sat there in silence, the sound of crickets and the occasional rustle of leaves filling the air. "You okay?" he asked softly, his voice breaking the stillness. I nodded, but then I turned to him, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "This, us, it's scary, Lucas. But it's also the only thing that feels right." He reached for my hand, his fingers threading through mine. "I know," he said, his voice steady. "But I'm not going anywhere, Amelia. Not now. Not ever." And in that moment, I knew it was true. Whatever this was, wherever it was going, it was real. It was messy and complicated, and maybe a little crazy, but it was ours. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of what came next.